He's the co-host of the Red 78 podcast alongside the Ireland assistant coach, Niamh Briggs. Alan Quinlan, good morning to you.
Morning, lads. How are you?
Flying it. And we've been just listening to the brand new Women's Six Nations show as well there in the ads, and plenty of coverage across the papers this morning. It's at a real high profile point, the tournament as well. And by the way, I just want to remind our audience that you can check out the Women's Six Nations show. It's available fully up on our YouTube channel. You would have heard there Ciara Griffin, Fiona Hayes on the show, looking ahead to the opening round of the TikTok Women's Six Nations. Gets underway for Ireland obviously against Wales tomorrow, and it's all in association with our friends at Vodafone. We all belong to the team of us. But Quinny, back to the business at hand. Is it almost a sense that we need to look at this as like almost a two-tiered league, in the sense that England are down the road with the contracts, France have the part-time bit going on, Wales also have the full-time contracts, but it's relatively new, so it's Ireland, Italy, Scotland and Wales almost in that second table. Is that the way to look at it, do you think?
Yeah, it is. I think it is a bit lopsided. Ireland, their second match is against France, and it's a difficult challenge. In round 4 they play England, so they're the really tough games. I think they're away to France and England like the men's team were, so it's a bit lopsided, you could say. But like the girls were saying there in the podcast, it has a feeling that this is a new era. There's been a lot of change and a lot of negativity probably put to one side now, and everyone's hopeful that it can be positive. I think the danger for Greg McWilliams, Niamh Briggs and the team and the rest of the coaching staff is maybe there's a little bit of expectation and excitement now, which is great, but they've got to temper that and be careful, because they've had a lot of setbacks, and psychologically, not going to the World Cup. Italy are going, Scotland are going, Wales are going, England are going, France are going. So the teams are going to play in the Six Nations will all be kind of building towards a World Cup in September, October. So it's tough for them, but there seems to be a good feeling about the group. And obviously the big games, as you say at the start there, France and England away, given the positions they're in, and the continuity and the quality of player, and the level of club games that they all play. I think Wales are tricky as well. Ireland beat Wales 45-0, obviously, in last year's Six Nations. It was a brilliant start to the campaign over in Cardiff. They've 12 full-time internationals now since the start of January. So is that going to benefit them? I'm sure it's going to be a different Welsh team. And how do Ireland cope? But I think Greg McWilliams, all he can focus on in the last period of time is preparing his own team, and the hope is that they get off to a good start. The challenges they have around their play, the improvements that are needed, the set piece was poor at times in that campaign in September, October. I think things improved in November against Japan and USA. And so I'm sure they've been working hard to try and remedy and fix things, but the hope is that they can start well tomorrow, and that confidence and that feel-good factor that seems to be there is generated into the performance.
Is there a danger, Alan, that there's an overreaction to whatever way the Six Nations turns out for this team? Because if they win, people might rush to say, well, everything's rosy in the garden again. If they start losing, people will say, well, has anything changed? And in reality, for anything to change, it's going to take a whole period of time. That any of the recommendations from the report surely have barely been implemented, let alone actually seen their effects in action over the last little while. Yeah,
it's a very good point, Owen, and there is a danger of that if Ireland get off to a really good start, that maybe they'll get, everybody will get excited and ahead of themselves. I think the important thing for Ireland, it's a home game, and their desire should be to win this game. They should be able to deal with that pressure and the pressure that Wales will bring. They'll be very, very determined to try and get a good start themselves. And as I said, they're 12 of the Welsh girls have been training full time since January. They've been backed by the Welsh Rugby Union. Who knows? Is that the right thing or the wrong thing? They have some other part-time player, some of the part-time contracts as well. And I think there has to be some patience here, because structures that came out in the report and the changes that have now been agreed, which both sides seem happy to draw a line in the sand and move forward, and the improvements around, the analysis. And I think that's one of probably the key areas for any player, and in my own experience, being able to get that feedback and that one-on-one video analysis, player cam, individuals, all that kind of stuff, and have proper people involved that can take the girls to one side and show them examples of how certain situations should work, and how maybe they've made mistakes in it. And so they're kind of starting from scratch a little bit with some of the girls, and they're relatively inexperienced on. I think there's some experience in this side, but there's a lot of inexperience. If you go through the squad, there's, I think Emer Constantine has the most caps at 23, but there's a lot of 5-6 cap players in that squad. There's certainly a lot of good, exciting players, but it's about just tempering that expectation and not expecting a lot. I suppose, of course, you can have expectation yourselves, but I think the reaction either way should be one of patience, because there is absolutely no doubt with the structures that are now in place with Greg McWilliams, who is a very good appointment. I think Niamh Briggs gone in there as well. I heard Dorothy Wall speaking about, her impact in the squad, and these girls getting the right game time with their clubs. Obviously, it would be one of the goals is to improve the domestic league and have it more competitive, because obviously the more games you play, the better you get. So a lot of these girls are still learning. They're relatively inexperienced. So we should really be looking to the future, and in 12 months' time, or it's this cycle now between now and the next World Cup, really, that you hope to see improvement on a continuous basis. I'm sure there'll be plenty of ups and downs, and when you play France and England, you're always on the back foot, and you're kind of limiting and minimising the damage when you play against those sides, because they're so organised, so strong, powerful. But let's hope to get off to a good start. There's a lot of excitement here. I think there's a lot of coverage being given to the women's game in the build-up. It's great that the girls are getting that exposure, and they're doing media stuff and they're doing interviews, and the game is live on TV tomorrow. And I think people want to get behind the team now, and a lot more people will be conscious of that and try and support the girls.
Yeah, and 3 from 5, I think, is what we're saying is the that's the goal.
I think so.
Really, that's
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. They should, dare I say, tomorrow is so important that they get off to a good start, because the second game they're away to France, which is obviously a tall order, then at home to Italy. So if you can get 2 good results there against Wales and Italy, which is very achievable, then you're heading to England in that 4th one, and you've got Scotland at home, and there'll have to be a little bit of even though it won't make any difference to the World Cup, but that last game against Scotland, that will spur the girls on to try and get a result there. So yeah, the goal would be, and I suppose internally they will have, and realistically looked at that situation, said 3 from 5 would be a brilliant result, and how competitive you can be against France and England then is the next step.
Yeah, and the wider conversation about what needs to be done about that lopsided nature of the tournament was a conversation for another day. Yourself and Niamh had Graham Roundtree on the Red 78 podcast this week, Quinny, and there's plenty of chat about him, and he addressed fairly front on, to be fair to him, the situation around the ongoing and prolonged, as he would put it, nature of the appointment of the new head coach. No word on it just yet, but he's getting the gig, isn't he?
I don't know, genuinely. I've been trying to it's been kept very, very, very tight, the whole situation, which is probably a good thing. It's not a good thing for the fans, because they want to know, and people trying to find out in the media and getting a little bit of info. But look, it's been a pretty long process. It's the 1st of April next week, and Johan van Gran announced in the middle of December that he was leaving. So it's been a little bit frustrating for people, but I suppose there's different reasons and factors around that.
What are they, Quinny? Is it a case that they just want to leave it because they don't want the noise around it and they just want to get on with the season, or is it a case that they're still looking for the right person?
I think there was obviously a period of time that they put it out there and people applied, and to get people together and look at the merits of each candidate, I think has taken a bit of time. It would indicate that there's probably some good candidates there, I think. And then you have a situation which is, you're possibly appointing within, and the merits of Graham Rowntree, and maybe the continuity that he can bring. So there's been a number of factors. I think obviously the RFU and David Nucifora would have been heavily involved in that. And Six Nations, maybe, even though people probably wonder why, but maybe that was probably decided that they're going to give it a bit of time, not rush into this decision. And I think, that's probably the reason. I think Munster fans would have loved to have known about this in January, and I think it's not great for the players either. I think, they're coming into a pivotal part of the season, and I think the squad probably need to know. The talk and what I'm hearing is it's very, very close to being announced. We may hear something next week, who knows? And to be honest, for anyone listening, there was no conversation with Graham Rowntree and myself before he came onto the podcast about, well, I've got the gig, but we can't talk about it because that's, politically, I can't do that. And me saying to him, oh, Graham, that's great. I won't say anything either. There was none of that. He was genuinely in the dark still. He interviewed a number of weeks, as did a number of candidates.
Is he the right person for the job then, Quinny? Is that the other way?
I think, and I've said this from the start, and I probably believe it more and more, and maybe I'll have to backtrack in this and react to if somebody else is announced. But I think the important part here for me is if somebody comes in now and is announced, they obviously don't go near this squad until pre-season. If there was a new candidate came in, someone out of the blue who hasn't been here. So they started pre-season then in end of June, started July, with it could be even the end of July, because I think it depends on how far Munster will go in the URC playoffs, because they run up to the 18th of June, that weekend. Players that have 4 weeks off. So you effectively send the end of July, and then it's a very short period for a new head coach to come in and start to get to know people, people's habits, the characters, the different guys who Graham would know. And I think the longer it's gone on, the more I think having that bit of continuity, it would benefit the squad. He obviously has had to interview well and present his plan and his, I won't say the philosophy, but just where he sees the club going. Individual players who he thinks can get up to the next level and take the game forward. They've signed well with Fekitoa. He's a very exciting signing. They've been incredibly unlucky with RG Snyman. Everybody knows about that. He's a game changer, and someone can just lift the whole group with his performances and what we've seen from South Africa. We haven't seen it from Munster, obviously, but if they can get to a point where that bit of continuity is kept, and then you have to look at, Adrian, assistant coaches. Who were the assistant coaches coming in? And they're the ones that, in my opinion, need to be the ones that can improve the squad, improve the young players, skill-wise, develop the game plan, particularly the expansive style that every team needs to have it in the locker now. You're not going to win trophies unless you can attack and score tries, and from improve the forwards as well. So I think the overall package, and we've seen there's a template there with the Irish squad, the way they've kind of turned the corner and their accuracy is so much better, and small little intricate things like the time the ball is in the air when you're trying to spread it wide, breaking down defenses, all that kind of stuff. And the players have learned a lot, I think, in the last while of what not to do and what you should do in certain situations, particularly under pressure. And in South Africa, you saw a situation where the team were 21-10 up. They could have been, I think it was, if they defended better, it would have been 21-0. They score a 4 try in the second half, which is brought back for a forward pass, which was minimal, I think, and could have easily been given. And suddenly you're losing the game. Unfortunately, those kind of experiences that you get are negative ones, but you can take stuff from that as well about game management. And I think, so there's still a side, and still a lot of those young players need to understand a little bit more about game management. But there's a fair bit of optimism there about some of these players. One of the things I asked him, which is, I think, just for the listeners to understand, is maybe someone will say, why would this be a goal? But when I played with Munster, one of the goals that you do at the start of the season, and it's just, I guarantee it's the same in the other provinces, is to get more players on the Irish team. So if you have more players on the national side, like Leinster have the vast majority of them, well, then you're exposing those players, and they're showing their quality, they're showing their level. They're now international quality. And the more international quality players you have in the group, the better the standard, the better the player, and the better the results. So it has to be a goal. And I asked him about that, and I think I look at across at a number of the younger Munster players, and they have that potential to get up to that level. So there's a lot to do, I think, but there's certainly an excitement there. And from a fan's point of view, I think there's a frustration. And it's probably just my own opinion. If Munster don't win a trophy this year, it's another year without one for sure, and it's frustrating. But how do they exit these competitions? Whether it's be URC semi-final, quarter-final, semi-final, final, or quarter-final, semi-final, final of Europe. It's how they go out and how they play in those games. And we've probably seen a couple of times the last number of years, Munster just going out. It's a negative when you lose, obviously, but it's the way you play when you go out. And they've kind of that they're stained a little bit by some of those exits in the last couple of years, because nobody has a divine right, and I think they're still a little bit off from actually you putting them down as favourites for URC or favourites for Europe. It's just, that's not realistic at the moment. But they should be a team that, if you meet them in a semi-final or final, that you're pretty wary of them, and they're going to test you and stuff. So what I'm saying is there's a bit more development in these players, but there's an excitement there. There's with their potential.
Yeah, we shall see what happens on that front, and obviously at the director rugby side as well. I'm sure there'll be interesting developments around that. We've Connacht Leinster obviously tomorrow at the sports ground, and one thing that we wanted to ask you before we let you wave, but a minute and a half here, Quinny, on the Eddie Jones stuff and the RFU. I don't know if you've seen this, but the RFU's been out. I don't know really what they've said. They've kind of said he's not bulletproof, but we're not sacking him. And depending on our results, obviously go in November and next year Six Nations, they're almost in too deep now, are they, to get rid of him?
Well, yeah, possibly. I think there's obviously they've obviously backed him and said, look, it's too late now to change. And I'm sure if they're sitting around the table and saying, well, will we or won't we, someone has convinced the doubters in the room that look what he did at the last World Cup. But I just don't think it's good enough. England, where they finished in the Six Nations, 5th last year, 3rd this year, could have been 5th again. The mitigation is he's missing a few players. Owen Farrell is a tremendous loss to him. Tuolangi, Johnny May, Watson, these kind of players. Can you rely on Tuolangi though going forward? You just don't know with the injury profile he's had. But I think Owen Farrell has been a big loss to him, and he's brought through some young players. But will they have that patience going forward? I think there's a summer tour to Australia for them. How that turns out, and I don't think it's ever too late to. You are in an ideal situation. You don't want to be, this far. It's 15 or 16 months out from a World Cup. You don't want to be changing that. But look at South Africa a couple of years ago when they made that change with Rassie and he brought him on to win a World Cup. It's late in the day, but I think at this stage they've probably decided in whatever meeting that, look, let him bring him forward. Unless there's disastrous results in Australia, or their November internationals, I think he'll be leading England to a World Cup. And dare I say it, he may pull a rabbit out of a hat and get them right. And I think come the World Cup, they'll still be a serious contender.
Yeah, dare you say it. Quinny, thanks a million.
Cheers, lads. Thanks.
Good man. Thanks, Alan Quinlan there. And you can check out more of his thoughts and Niamh Briggs and in conversation this week with Graham Rowntree. Well worth checking out if you just punch in the Red 78 into any of your podcast apps. You're going to pick that up and enjoy it no end. Right.